Ja, dit is altijd heel infantiel, maar dat doen ze bij de televisie ook. Maar het werkt kennelijk wel. Ja, onze volgende gast is een Britse ingenieur, een universitair docent, Ellie Cosgrave. We are going to talk English.
Thank
and
you,
she's going to do her
that.
story in English. I read something about you, and it was, for me, it's interesting. I don't know why. Maybe it's childish, but you are a dancer, right?
I am. One of the things that I love to do is dance, yes.
Yes. And like what kind of dance is that?
So I'm in a contemporary dance company in London, but it's just, yeah, for fun mainly. But I have been bringing dance into my work over the last 5 or so years. I guess a lot of my work is around challenging the way that we, as engineers, I'm trained as an engineer, think about the world and the kind of tools that we use. What do we understand is possible about the world? And I'm often very frustrated about engineers in the kind of myopic detail and only technical terms that we think about when we're thinking about big social infrastructure projects. So the logical conclusion for me was to hang out with some dancers and bring dance artists together with engineers to take them out into the city and ask them, what do you see? What is possible for this space, and how would you intervene in this space? And the research results were amazing, thinking about what do dancers see as the possibilities for how we can move through space, how we can design mobility infrastructure in a completely different way.
Do you have a lecture about this too?
I do have a lecture about this. You can find that online, okay. I'm sure, and there are papers.
But you're going to do a different lecture. Can you tell us in a summary what it's going to be about?
Yeah, I'm going to be talking today about the idea of the feminist city. What would it mean to build a world where we centered the needs and safety and well-being of women, girls, and gender-diverse people? Okay.
The floor is yours. Good luck. Applaus alsjeblieft nog.
Thank you. So yeah, we've had a little taster about what I'm going to be talking about, and I'd like to just start off by thanking you for being willing to listen to me speak in English, and also to the amazing invitation that I've had today, which is to give my last lecture. This lecture would be, if I never gave a lecture again, the lecture that I would choose to give you today. And so that's a beautiful invitation, and an invitation that made me think about my purpose in my work. What do I want to see different about the world, and how I would hope to pass the baton on. And so this does end with a call to action and a call to arms. So watch out for that and be ready to start the race. So I love cities. Thank you. I love cities. As a teenager growing up in London, I loved the freedom that being in a city offered me, the ability to see my friends, access to all sorts of cultural activities, and a right to protest. As an adult, the city offers me a vast network of family and friends who are there and by my side. I get to meet all sorts of interesting people from all across the world every day, and I get to do the work that I am so passionate about and have really exciting work opportunities that brought me here today to other cities. From a very young age, I understood that by simply presenting as a woman in public space, I was vulnerable to male violence. I managed, as many of us have, on a daily basis when I was going to school to see my friends, to go to the shops. I was managing sexual harassment, violence, and intimidation on a daily basis. And so my career over the last 15 years has really been about understanding and unpicking my life experience. I decided to study civil engineering at university because as a teenager, I understood that these people People who design infrastructure are shaping all of our lives, and that's a huge amount of power to have, and I wanted some of that. I also was incredibly disappointed when I entered engineering as a student and as a professional, firstly, that social justice and social ambition that I saw engineering as existing to achieve was not necessarily at the heart of what we did as an industry, and disappointment as well of seeing misogyny in the very institutions and organizations that were producing our cities. And so that has led me to be who I am today and where I am today in my career. I am an associate professor of urban policy at University College London. I chose to do that job because I wanted to, because I'm a nerd, essentially, because I wanted to understand and research what is going on in our cities. I wanted to study feminist literature and see how that applies to the city. I am the director of a social enterprise that we have launched this week as part of Publica, which is an urban design organization. I'm part of that organization because I want to see difference on the ground. And thirdly, I am an activist. I help run an organization called the My Body Back Project, which gives medical care, predominantly maternity care and sexual health care, to women who have experienced sexual violence, because it is my passion and belief that women need better services. And so the ambition of all of my work is to be able to bring all of these aspects of my beliefs and passions together to create cities that are better and safer for women and girls. In order to do that, in the past few months, I have been working with the Greater London Authority with their Good Growth by Design and Regeneration team to create design guidelines for making London safer for women, girls, and gender diverse people. That launches, hopefully next week or the week after, so please do watch out for that. In that research, we explore two main things. Firstly, what does safety mean? What is safety in the context of our cities and of urban development? And the second thing that we address is what can we practically do in our urban development projects, from scoping to researching to delivery and design and to maintenance. And we create in this work a toolkit that helps in each of those processes. So it's a very practical toolkit. Again, that will be available for you all to see in the coming weeks. So I will focus on the question, what do we mean when we talk about safety? Often when we're thinking about safety, we think about being unsafe. And what that leads us to believe is around issues of being endangered. We think about dangerous places in the city, getting run over by a car, the dangers of pollution, the dangers even of sexual violence and sexual harassment. What we don't necessarily consider are the times in the city where we're not endangered, but we might feel uncomfortable, even though this situation is perfectly safe, or we are simply inconvenienced based on a variety of issues. From a gender perspective, being inconvenienced often is the daily tasks that, as a woman, we undertake in order to feel safe. It is the inconvenience of taking the longer route home in order to feel safe. It's the inconvenience of having to pay for a taxi. It's the inconvenience of putting our headphones in and looking down, putting our keys between our fingers so that we feel safe in that space. Importantly, we may not actually feel unsafe when we're doing this safety work. We may just be adopting it as part of our daily habit as women to do these tasks. And this work has been called safety work. And I'd just like to read from one of my favorite scholars, Fiona Vera Gray and Liz Kelly, who write this about safety work. When considered in isolation, such challenges can be dismissed as an annoying but necessary result of living in a world where occasionally strangers may do you harm. But when seen across the course of a woman's lifetime, these adaptations come to be understood as a particularly gendered message that women need to be less vocal, less visible, and less free in order to be safe. And so we can see in that notion of safety work that when we're thinking about what safety means in our cities, we have to not focus simply on crime, but to be thinking about these daily inconveniences. So, how do we do this? To explore this question, I want to give you two scenarios. The first scenario goes like this. Imagine you're in the city of your choice, the neighborhood of your choice. They've made it safe. It looks like this, scenario one. There are police on every corner, lots of CCTV. It's floodlit with, it's floodlit. There are no benches to stop and rest where young people who are causing social disturbance used to sit. There are no dark corners for anyone to be able to jump out at you at. Scenario one. Scenario two, we have well-designed and well-maintained public spaces that signal to me that somebody is taking care of this space, that this space is important, that my space is important, and therefore I am important. That there are cafes with views onto the streets, that there are toilets that make this space accessible both for my elderly mother and my children, that there are play facilities that make this space possible for me to sit and rest, that these spaces are beautifully lit, thoughtfully lit, that I can see around me and that there is little glare, and a space where I know that bystanders will know, or that everyone on the street around me will know when I am experiencing violence. They will know how to intervene, and they will know how to offer care to me. I imagine it's no secret to you that option two is my preference. And yet, when we think about safer streets, when we think about violence against women and girls, in the UK context for sure, but globally, the way in which we invest our capital is in more policing, more CCTV, and more generic lighting systems. And imagine you're a person of color or a trans woman in that space who has historically been victimized by policing systems. These spaces become yet more unsafe. So, if safety for women and girls is centered on good design, then we win not only from a safety perspective, but from a health perspective, from an accessibility perspective, from a climate justice perspective. What we also learn from those scenarios is that, again, safety is, or a sense of safety in public space, is much more than an absence of violence, harassment, and intimidation. That it's about being able to actually use that space. And that's the benches, that's the toilets, that's the play spaces, that's the good public transport systems, that's the segregated cycle lanes. Those are the things that make me safe. But it's also about a sense of belonging. Am I celebrated here? Is someone like me, does someone like me belong here? Do I see someone like me celebrated in local art and monuments? Do I see local people, do I see myself reflected in the other people on that street? So we do have to care, we do have to manage and work towards ending violence, harassment, intimidation, but part of that story also must include increasing usability and increasing a sense of belonging. Projects that are doing this. There's a fantastic co-designed, rewind. One of the ways in which we one of what I think are the most fundamental ways in which we need to take action forward in this is not by presuming, like, okay, great, we need to create a sense of belonging, put up some local art. Women and girls and gender diverse people need to be part of that decision making. We need to have our voice at the table when these decisions are being made, and we need to have the power to affect them. This is not consultation that takes our views into consideration, and we'll try and do our best to include it. That's a complete inclusion of people as part of the design method. Examples that do this. In Umeå, teenage girls designed their own seating system in a park. This was, you may have, I don't know if you've seen it, it was circular, they were hanging, it enabled sight lines out, there were interesting lights, they could put their own music on. This was a space for them. In a local park near me, I was so happy to see a beautiful statue celebrating the women who used to run the sweet shop that was on that site, and who used to give 10p or something to children on their birthdays. This is us celebrating the people who make our city and celebrating the things that we care about. There are methodologies that really can transform consultation, participatory design processes. Putting cameras into people's hands and allowing them to go out into their neighborhood, take pictures and tell stories about it. That's them creating their own narrative. It's not saying, what do you think about this bench? It's a much broader story. That's called photo voice, if you would like to look that up. The examples are endless, but one I'll end on as a dancer was a design studio that was creating space for girls to dance in public space. Fantastic. But most of all, the most important thing we need to do these projects, but we also need to work together. We cannot do this on our own. We need to make sure that we're doing some work in London. Can we be doing it across the Netherlands with you? Can we be doing it? I've worked in projects in Pakistan and Johannesburg. Can we, the patriarchy is everywhere, and the solutions are bottom-up, and they are when professions decide to do something differently together. For my part, this week, as I briefly mentioned, we have, my organization has launched a campaign which has been supported by 15 of London's biggest landowners, property developers, and business improvement districts. In this campaign, we want to do three things. Firstly, we know that a lot of the knowledge and expertise about what needs to change already exists. We do not need more surveys. We can. We need more data sometimes, but we already have a lot of the information about how to do better gender-inclusive design. Unfortunately, this is often held across different websites. A lot of it is in academia. It's distributed and not very accessible. So we're creating a knowledge platform that will create what I'm calling cheat sheets, where anyone can pick up and understand the very basics about what we're talking about gender-inclusive design. And it also will give us the language to be able to have the discussion and the debate. Secondly, we want to create the opportunity for radical systems innovation. Too often when we're thinking about innovation in cities, we talk rightly, but maybe too narrowly, about tech innovation, about the new technology that's going to change. Rarely do we talk about systems innovation, about transforming the way our industry works. So we'll be getting together our sponsors and anyone who wants to join us to talk about what are the ways in which we can radically subvert and change how we produce our cities. And thirdly, we need projects on the ground that show us, give us the vision and the view about what can be different when we do design differently. And so we'll be working with some of the developers that have sponsored us to roll out gender-inclusive projects across London and hopefully globally as well. This is my last lecture, so here's the call to action. I urge you to reflect on where you have power to make a difference. Where do you have power to point out what's going on? Where do you have power to educate? Where do you have power to educate yourself about these issues? And work together with us, with me, with each other, to create cities that are better for everyone. And for me, that is an experimentation. Experiment. Get it wrong. Do it again. And I'd like to just leave you with a quote from the amazing Professor Leslie Kern, who wrote the book, The Feminist City, and that is a fantastic, easy read. She ends her book saying, "The feminist city is an ongoing experiment in living differently, living better, and living more justly in an urban world." Thank you.
Thank you. Ellie? Will you please stay here? Oh,
I know, I
take
just
some
need
water,
to
of
drink.
course. Ja, dames en heren, dit is het moment dat wij... ja, jullie mogen vragen stellen. Ik hoop dat jullie veel vragen hebben. Als je een beetje, ja, hoe noem je dat? Aarzelt over je Engels, dan wil ik hem ook wel in het Engels stellen, je Nederlandse vraag. Dus wie zou een vraag willen stellen? Wie heeft een vraag? Ja, kom maar aan. Even kijken of ik jou ga bereiken daar. Dat gaat lukken. Dankjewel.
First of all, thank you for your very inspiring lecture. I will also like to ask you, what are places that you consider safe? What are like some reference projects where you think, I love these places and I feel safe here and everyone should be? What are some of the places in the world that you think are like that?
So there's a very nice example. Sadly, I have not been to Vienna, which is a big error for me. So I'm going to fix that hopefully soon. But they've done some really nice work. Over the last more than 20 years, 25 years, there has been a high-level policy in the city to do gender mainstreaming across all of their areas of work. And so now, 20 years later, we're starting to see that really trickle through into creating a different city. So firstly, I think the timescales are indicative about the type of work. They have a project in their parks, and they were noticing that in the parks across Vienna, they were doing research about who's using it, what age, and were getting gender disaggregated data. And they noticed that up until about the age of 8, boys and girls were using the public park in a very similar numbers, but above the age of 8, girls' use completely dropped off. And what they understood about that was that as the type of play was changing into being kind of more gendered, when children have to socially negotiate the use of space, i.e. they have to decide between them who gets to use this space, boys generally win out. And there are a variety of reasons for that, partly because boys are trained to take up space, but also because of the nature of kind of boys' sports tending to be kind of football or basketball that do take up quite a lot of space, where girls are socialized to be talking and maybe walking. And so what they did was to create separate spaces throughout the parks for different types of activity. So there was space for football and basketball and all of those activities, but there were also benches and places where people could sit and talk. And they noticed as soon as they changed the infrastructure, the use of the park became 50-50. Now, we can't really stop there, because still girls aren't playing football. And so what this really speaks to, and boys aren't sitting talking, to be blunt about it. So what is important that we do on top of that is to create social programs that enable access to those different parts of the park. So just creating a football field doesn't mean that girls are going to use it, but creating a women and girls football team may do, a league. Or there's been examples of skate parks, which a lot of girls feel when they're joining a skate park that they're very visible as a girl and that they're representing all girls. So there's this kind of male gaze thing going on. So to create an hour in the week or in the day, which is for girls, which is the girls' space to experiment, to learn how to do that work well, to skate and to enjoy being in their bodies in public space. And what they found in skate parks that do that is that actually the gender use of the skate park for the rest of the week actually becomes more even. And so what we find, we don't necessarily know exactly why, maybe because people are more skilled up, but also maybe just because there is a signal that you belong here because there's a girls' program. So girls, it's a message and a brand even that says this space is for girls too. But I haven't been to those spaces, so that's not quite the question that you're asking, but I hope that
Okay, Ellie, I have a question here.
Yeah, we are working with 9 cities on Cities for Walking, which is really important, of course, for girls and women as well. And we are also looking at the map and the legenda of maps, of planning maps of cities. Do you have an advice or an idea of what should really be in the legenda if you make feminist maps?
Oh my gosh. So I'm actually working on this at the moment. We've got an area of London that we're mapping, and we promised them an inclusivity map. And so my team has come back to me and said, so what should we put in it? And I'm like, There are all sorts of things. Firstly, I would say map public art. Who is represented in these spaces? What will we visit on this walk? What will we see? What will come across us? Map organizations that are around that maybe create work around gender inclusion that you might that kind of signals is there infrastructure here for women and girls. Some of the data won't exist. So if you're doing what we're going to be doing in London is going to the area and doing gender inclusivity audits with local communities. So we're going to get the communities to map it essentially with us. There are great advice about women's safety audit methodologies that's been produced by UN Habitat and Women in Cities International that you can find to go out and collect this data ourselves. And so I think there's a really important point here about we are mapping people's experience. And so there is only so far that we can get in terms of the kind of more rational work. You might choose, and we have to put, as I said before, we have to speak to people about what does it feel like. So you can create experience maps by speaking to 20 women and walking around and giving it some sort of number or a name or a color. And then we create this map of, there's the blue area of the city, there's green, there's red, there's purple. So I think we have to be a bit freer in the way in which we kind of get meaning out of this kind of data.
Yes?
Yeah?
Or you want to, yeah?
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I'm
sure.
sure more will come.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, my name is Laurens. I work at Phoenix Emancipation Expertise Center across the street here. And together with the local government, we are working on a campaign against sexual street harassment.
Cool.
And one of the things we're doing is we want to reach as many men as possible to become part of the solution. Yeah. Are there any tips or advices you have?
Yes. Yes. So, we have done many campaigns in the UK in cities that focus on men. I think it's absolutely right to be including men and focusing on male behavior within this. I have an hour-long panel discussion where we go into details of that, so I'll be really happy to send it to you, which is my kind of bugbears about some of those campaigns. Okay, where do I start? Don't recreate violence in your campaign. So often when we see images that are focused at men, we go, this behavior is bad. So TF, Transport for London and National Rail wanted to put out a campaign, which maybe I'm too sensitive, but we wanted to put out a campaign that would be on our trains where women will not be able to leave because they'll be on a train. But there are images, it's saying, don't do this. And it says, don't flash. And it has a picture of like a zipper being unfolded. Don't stare, and it's got like googly eyes. And so when we are in spaces, we have to be very careful about reminding women about the violence that can be perpetrated, because there are a lot of women have very real and significant trauma around sexual violence and sexual harassment. If you're putting those images in a space, it's just not safe. When we're talking about targeting men, absolutely, men speaking to men is very important. On top of that, I think sometimes in those messaging campaigns, we forget that women are powerful too, and women can be powerful bystanders. I 100% understand that this is not women's problem, and so we should not be telling women what to do about it. So there's a tricky balance, but sometimes I find that campaigns are playing into masculinity rather than dismantling it. Like, be a man, don't sexually harass people. I would say avoid anything that feeds into stereotypes about masculinity and femininity, and understand that in a street situation, if we're saying it's men who intervene, then women become we reinforce their position as powerless. So what I would focus all campaigns about what does it mean to be a good, active bystander, and that can apply to anyone. And then we could have images of all sorts of people intervening, because of course issues around sexual harassment are particular, but they're not that different to racial harassment or faith-based harassment or harassment based on disability. And so bystander training, that's what I had in my second scenario, is that everyone knew what to do. And I would focus always on those key messages about what can we do. And there's more, but I'll share that video with you. Very happy to.
Ellie, I'm here. This question.
Do I have to stand up, or can I sit down?
mag
You can
staan.
stay seated, do whatever you like.
Doe maar wat je
Well,
prettig
he
vindt.
says I should stay up. So, I work at a local government, and me as a person, I'm a very outspoken feminist. But sometimes I feel like people think I'm ranting about what's wrong with the patriarchy, and
Yes.
basically give me the feeling, just shut up and be pretty about it. And not just men, but also other women. And I was wondering, could you give me any advice on how to make people see that, no, I'm not just ranting, this is actually a problem, and also how can do that in the workplace, where I think we can still make a lot of changes towards a more positive look towards feminine.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Feminines. So yeah, I was wondering, could you give me some advice to be heard, actually, and not be put down and stuffed in a corner like, yeah, don't talk about it.
Just to say thank you very much for sharing that, and obviously I empathize. So I understand. There are lots of things. Firstly, the thing that comes to mind is that when we're actually trying to do something transformative, where we're actually trying to change how a system works, especially a system of power, where many people have benefited from that power, I don't actually think that's that true. Many people feel that they have benefited from that power, whether explicitly or not. When we're trying to disrupt anything, there's going to be defensiveness and backlash. And that's to be expected and to some extent to be understood. It's an emotion-based response based on a threat. And so I don't think it's necessarily that helpful when we want to love people and we want to move forward together to then place them as the bad guys who's getting in our way of justice, because then we're polarized and we're just going to fight, and we're going to care more about who's right and who's wrong rather than the work that we can do to make our whole cities better. Although you may, I give you permission, to rant about it to your friends and family, because I think it's also important to acknowledge what's happening and release it. In interactions with people who seem against, or who you feel are against you, I would say try to to speak from the level of personal experience if you feel safe enough to do so. If you talk about why this matters to you as a human being, how has it affected you in your life? How does it affect you today in your workplace? And invite them to share about their experience. What does being a man mean if we're presuming it's a man? It may not be. Why don't you feel that sexual violence has affected your life, even though I know the way he talks to you all the time? Why? So that we kind of peel off this layer about who's right and who's wrong, and we get down to a human connection and human experience. And finally, I've been told most of my life, or I've understood about something about professionalism means that I leave myself at the door, means that I do not, Ellie, it's not appropriate to spin in the hallway. But I'm like, spinning's fun. Anyway, that's another thing. Professionalism looks like we only want your brain and we only want your productivity. For me, that's like one of the biggest problems with how we live our lives. And I invite all of us to bring our whole selves to the workplace. Caveat, if we feel safe to do so. Like, don't put yourself in danger by sharing your trauma to someone who is not ready or willing to hear it. So I would suggest to start to break down a bit the barriers that we hold in our own mind about what it means to be a professional human being. And if it's not working for you, go somewhere who will nurture that part of you. That's my advice.
Oké, mag ik een heel groot applaus voor Ellie?
Dank je. You done?
Yeah, it's really inspiring, thank you.
Thank you.
How
for
was it
having
for
me.
you?
It was beautiful. Thank you for all your questions and applause.
Thank you. Oké, yes. Mensen, ik ga jullie ergens bij betrekken. Op het programma staat nu dat ik een last lecture zou doen, maar dat had wel ongeveer een half uur geleden moeten beginnen. Ik heb er helemaal geen bezwaren mee als we het niet doen, maar als er iemand in het publiek is die vindt van ja, ik ben toch echt gekomen voor jouw last lecture, dan hoor ik dat graag nu, want ik wil niet mensen teleurstellen. Ik zie 3 vingers. Nee, ik maak een grapje. Ik zie iets meer. Oké, ik kan het doen, maar ik moet echt met oog op de tijd moet ik iets korter doen dan begroot is. Dus ik hoop dat jullie daar begrip voor hebben, want we moeten ombouwen voor het volgende programma-onderdeel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Ik hoor vandaag heel veel interessante dingen, omdat ik ben nu natuurlijk een beetje de neutrale moderator of de dagvoorzitter, hoe je het wil noemen, de host. Maar eigenlijk alles wat er vandaag besproken is, bijna alles, heeft mij ook geraakt. En wat bedoel ik daarmee? Vanuit mijn eigen achtergrond, en vaak als ik over mijn achtergrond begin, hebben de mensen het meteen over die etniciteit. Mijn ouders zijn Turks, dat zie je ook waarschijnlijk wel aan mijn uiterlijk. Maar dat beschouw ik me als een klein onderdeel van mijn achtergrond. Mijn achtergrond is vooral dat ik uit een sociale onderklasse kom. Dat mijn ouders me net boven die armoedegrens zaten. Mijn achtergrond is ook dat ik ben geboren en getogen in Deventer, in het oosten van Nederland. En ik kan je zeggen, als je in de media later gaat werken, dan worden al deze factoren als een soort handicap gezien. Dus van, oh ja, kom je echt helemaal uit het oosten van Nederland? Echt waar, zo ver? En oh ja, kom je uit de provincie en zo? Dus, en je bent Turks? Oh ja, dat is wel spannend, hè? En dan ga je dan vaak op vakantie naar Marokko en zo, weet je wel? Die vragen krijg ik echt. Ja, jullie geloven misschien, maar het is echt zo. En natuurlijk het eeuwige misverstand van, ja, wat is dat? Opgroeien in armoede. En dat vind ik eigenlijk wel het meest schijnende. Ook wat we net met de mensen, tenminste die erbij waren, met de klas hebben gezien. Armoede is iets wat je altijd met je leven, gewoon de rest van je leven met je meedraagt. Als je nu naar mij kijkt, dan word ik nog steeds gedreven door de armoede die wij hadden in onze jeugd. Maar dat is niet de enige. Ik ga dat straks uitleggen. Er is nog iets. Allebei mijn ouders zijn analfabeet. Dat klinkt misschien heel gek, vooral omdat ik een schrijver ben. Daar ergens achter die flesjes staat mijn debuutroman. Ik ben schrijver van romans, ik schrijf columns, maar mijn ouders zijn analfabeet. Waarom? Zij kwamen als zelfvoorzienende gastarbeiders, ze waren boeren, zelfvoorzienend. Ze kwamen toen als gastarbeiders naar Nederland, als analfabeten. Zij hoefden het onderwijs niet in. Wij, de kinderen, moesten het onderwijs in om uiteindelijk hen te gaan redden. Maar dat betekent ook, voor wie het nu even doordenkt, is, ik ben nooit als kind voorgelezen, om maar iets te noemen. Dus ik heb nooit een introductie gehad in de Nederlandse taal, in de Nederlandse cultuur ook. Als het op school, op de basisschool ging over Jip en Janneke en Siske en Wiske en weet ik veel wat. Ik had geen idee wie die figuren waren. Het enige wat ik wel wist was goede tijden, slechte tijden. Maar dat kwam omdat mijn moeder daar altijd iedere avond naar wilde kijken. Vooral het kijken, want ze begrepen het niet. Ik moest dan real life gaan tolken wat er gebeurde in goede tijden, slechte tijden. Dus dat is een beetje mijn culturele opvoeding. En nu is het is heel gek wat er kan gebeuren. Dat wil ik echt benadrukken, want ik zei mijn ouders zijn allebei analfabeet. Dat betekent ook dat ze mijn werk niet kunnen lezen. Vaak als ik dit vertel in een bibliotheek of zo, of in een boekhandel, dan krijg ik altijd van die blikken met medelijden van, dus jouw ouders kunnen jouw boeken niet lezen, wat sneu voor jou. En in het begin vond ik dat ook heel zielig voor mezelf, want het is toch een prestatie om literatuur te maken. Ik moet nu zeggen, mijn gedachten daarover zijn wel een beetje veranderd, want mijn boeken gaan ook voor een groot deel over mijn ouders. En, dus ik kan alles opschrijven wat ik wil over mijn ouders, ze kunnen het toch niet lezen. Ik heb heel veel collega-schrijvers die echt wachten dat een vader of een moeder doodgaat. Dat spreken ze ook gewoon echt uit, hè? Want dan kunnen ze echt een vader of een moederboek schrijven. Nou, dat probleem heb ik niet. Dus nu is het toch ook wel weer ergens een soort voordeel. Maar dat was het vroeger helemaal niet. En waarom vertel ik dit? Omdat we hebben het gehad over kansengelijkheid, kansenongelijkheid, over segregatie. Alles is taal, als je het aan mij vraagt. Alles is taal, alles is taal. Taal is ook meteen je netwerk. Taal is ook op welke manier je sociaal mee kan doen in een samenleving. Mijn ouders kregen vroeger ook altijd van die briefjes als er een speciale dag was. Maar jullie moesten eens weten hoe vaak ik wel niet op de basisschool met mijn 2 broers op maandag tevergeefs, dus op maandagochtend naar school ben gelopen en dat de school gesloten was. Hebben jullie enig idee waarom de school gesloten was? Pasen inderdaad, dus tweede paasdag of tweede Pinksterdag inderdaad. En dan kwamen wij aan en wij begrepen dat niet. En als dat soort dingen je overkomt, dan voel je al snel een buitenstaander, omdat je de feestdag niet kent. Je ouders die worden kennelijk op een bepaalde manier bejegend, op een heel generieke manier, namelijk iedereen kreeg briefjes van maandag is de school gesloten. Maar ja, als jij ouders hebt die en niet kunnen lezen en niet Nederlands spreken, dan wordt het heel moeilijk om dat te begrijpen. Dus op die manier voelde ik me ook al vrij snel een buitenstaander. Niet alleen om hoe mijn profiel was, maar ook door hoe ik bejegend werd. En ik heb me ook heel vaak afgevraagd later in mijn leven, hoe had dit anders gekund? We hebben het over, weet je wel, dit is de dag van de stad. Iedereen moet mee kunnen doen, iedereen moet erbij kunnen horen. Ik heb heel vaak gedacht, waarom is er nooit iemand geweest die gewoon even bij ons langskwam? Of dat nou een onderwijzer is, een buurman, iemand van buitenaf, een sportclub, weet ik wat. Gewoon, al is het maar een half uur per dag, dat je gaat uitleggen hoe de dingen werken hier in Nederland, hoe het in elkaar zit precies, zodat je zelf ook weer vooruit kan. En waarom zeg ik dit? Dit is niet zonder reden, omdat ik nu een heel particulier verhaal wil houden. Omdat ik nu ook zie, ik heb 2 kinderen, 4 en 6, groep 2 en groep 3. Bij hen in de klas zitten Syrische jongetjes. En wat gebeurt er? Tegenwoordig wordt niet gecommuniceerd via briefjes, maar via een Paro-app. Ik weet niet of jullie dat kennen, maar dat is zo'n app van docenten. En daarmee sturen ze appjes naar de ouders om te vertellen wat er allemaal gebeurt. Ik zal nooit vergeten dat ik met Sinterklaas, december kwam ik op school, basisschool. En we moesten voor de kinderen een schoenendoos meenemen. Er moest een surprise gemaakt worden, zo ik weet niet precies hoe die in elkaar zat. En de 2 Syrische jongetjes hadden geen schoenendoos mee. En die mevrouw, die juf die er was, die werd nu boos op die kinderen. En ik ging van haar vragen, ja maar wacht even, u wordt nu boos op die kinderen dat ze niet mee hebben gedaan, want een ander kind zou dus geen cadeau krijgen daardoor. Maar hoe heeft u gecommuniceerd met dat kind? Hoe heeft u uitgelegd dat er een schoenendoos moet komen? Toen zei ze, ja, via die Paro-app natuurlijk. En ik dacht, ja maar hoe kan dit nou? Deze fouten maakten we 20 jaar geleden al. En kennelijk is er niks. Kijk, ik wil nogmaals niet generaliseren, het is overal anders, maar even specifiek dit geval, en dit geval staat niet op zich. Kennelijk is er niks veranderd en gebeuren nog steeds dezelfde dingen. Je had toch lering kunnen trekken van alles wat hiervoor gebeurd is. In gedeelte over klassen ging het over nog iets. Allebei mijn broers zaten op de MAVO. Als je uit onze buurt kwam, wij kwamen uit de achterbuurt. Als je uit de achterbuurt komt, dan mag je zeggen dat je uit de achterbuurt komt. Wij kwamen uit de achterbuurt en wij werden wel geprofileerd. Of je ging VMBO doen, dat bestond trouwens nog niet. IVBO, VBO of MAVO, dat waren een beetje onze niveaus. Maar waarom? Onze ouders die waren allemaal met hun handen bezig. Automonteurs, stucadoor, schoonmaaksters in een ziekenhuis, in een fabriekshal, noem maar op. Dus er werd gezegd, gaan jullie ook maar iets met jullie handen doen. En we hebben het over trauma's gehad en dingen die invloed op je hebben. Ik heb het net gesproken over armoede. Maar wat er bij mij gebeurde was, ik kreeg wonder boven wonder. Waarschijnlijk omdat ik aanleg had voor de taal, nieuwsgierig was. Ik kreeg een ateneumadvies. En dat was nog nooit voorgekomen bij ons in de buurt, dat iemand uit onze wijk dus een ateneumadvies kreeg. En op het moment dat de juf dat mededeelde aan mij, was haar eerste vraag, tenminste ze vertelde dus eerst, je hebt ateneum. En dan was haar eerste vraag, bij wie heb je afgekeken tijdens het maken van je CITO-toets? Heel wonderlijke vraag. Vooral wonderlijk omdat ik pas 20 jaar later begreep wat ik had moeten antwoorden. Ik had moeten zeggen, mevrouw, bij wie had ik moeten afkijken? Ik ben de enige met een ateneumadvies. Maar goed, dat heb ik pas veel te laat bedacht, dus misschien was ik ook niet zo slim. Maar zij zei, ja, ik ga je toch naar een MAVO sturen ook. En ook op dat moment, ze wilden me trouwens eerst naar een VBO sturen, later werd het pas een MAVO. Ook op dat moment voel je je als kind echt vernederd. En ik wil een paar dingen meegeven aan jullie. Ik moet dus mijn last lecture iets korter doen. Ik zou jullie heel veel dingen willen meegeven. Dit soort gebeurtenissen neem je mee de rest van je leven. Dit verdwijnt nooit. Als mensen aan mij vragen, Eus, waarom doe je zoveel? Waarom ben je zo'n perfectionist? Waarom wil je jezelf altijd opnieuw bewijzen? Waarom kun je nooit genieten van dingen? Dan zeg ik altijd, ja, maar dat is heel duidelijk. Dat is ontstaan in mijn jeugd. Toen zagen ze het niet, toen geloofden ze het niet, toen wilden ze het niet accepteren. En op een gegeven moment ga je daar zelf ook in geloven. Ik weet van mezelf echt wel wat ik kan. Het is echt niet zo dat ik zo'n laag zelfbeeld heb en denk van ik kan helemaal niks en weet ik veel wat. Echt niet. Maar ik heb ook zo'n stemmetje in mijn hoofd dat zegt van ja, het moet altijd beter. Want je kan altijd ontmaskerd worden. Je hoort er nooit helemaal bij. Er kan een moment aanbreken dat mensen tegen jou zeggen van ja, weet je, je bent er ook, maar niet van harte, zeg maar. Want je komt niet op de eerste plek. En dat gevoel is nooit verdwenen. Dus wat ik jullie wil meegeven is, het maakt niet uit waar je werkt, wat je doet. Het gaat om de omgang met mensen. Op het moment dat jij volledig vanuit een systeem opereert en denkt van ja, onze systemen schrijven voor dat wij op die manier met mensen moeten omgaan, dan weet ik niet of je alles uit andere mensen hebt gehaald. Sterker nog, je zou even zo'n gedachtenspel kunnen doen. En het is de laatste dag van je leven. Het is ook een last lecture, hè. Het is de laatste dag van je leven. En je ligt zo na te denken over het leven. En je denkt, heb ik wel alles uit andere mensen gehaald? En als dan je antwoord nee is, dan lijkt me dat heel onbevredigend. Uiteindelijk had ik de veerkracht, de intrinsieke motivatie om toch iets van mijn leven te maken. Ik ben via MAVO naar een MBO gegaan. Van de mbo ben ik naar de hbo gegaan. En van de hbo ben ik uiteindelijk naar de VU gegaan en heb ik Nederlandse taal en cultuur gestudeerd. Dus een enorme stapelaar noem je dat. En dat klinkt een beetje als een stoer woord van oh, hij is een stapelaar. Maar het is helemaal niet leuk om een stapelaar te zijn. Want op mijn 28e kwam ik pas op de universiteit. Ik ben nu trouwens 38. Nou, wou ik toch gezegd hebben. Maar dat was niet nodig geweest. Dat was niet nodig geweest. Waarom was het niet nodig geweest? Als er iets meer menselijkheid was geweest, in mijn omgeving, weet ik zeker dat mijn leven ook een stuk makkelijker was gegaan tot het punt nu. Ik zeg niet dat het leven makkelijk moet zijn. Iedereen moet strijden, iedereen moet vechten, iedereen heeft met tegenslagen te maken. Maar we kunnen elkaar wel helpen. Dus laten we alsjeblieft elkaar ook helpen en laten we het elkaar niet moeilijk maken. Dank jullie wel. We gaan nu wel even afbreken. We gaan hier dus opnieuw bouwen, ander decor. Ik hoop dat ik jullie straks weer zie, want dan gaan we verder met het programma. Dank jullie wel.